So heading into another hour with Glenn Kimball. We'll get to the calls coming up. I noticed the phones have been pretty active, but we won't start taking any for a while yet. But we'll get you into the conversation, we promise. We're talking about Bigfoot, the evidence of Bigfoot in ancient manuscripts, and not just Bigfoot, but a civilized Bigfoot community that existed in biblical times, that existed underground, that practiced a type of burial custom which has prevented its bones from being discovered, yet we'll find out what Glenn Kimball has already uncovered next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So Glenn Kimball is the head of Kimball College. You can link up to him through coasttocoastam.com. Always interesting self-exploration, that is to say, autodidacts everywhere have been learning from Glenn Kimball's website for years. And although they can't get an accredited degree yet, right, Glenn? But they can't get a master's or anything yet at your website, but they can get hours of pleasure and self-improvement. Fair to say?
That is correct. At this point, we've had some people offer us accreditation, but then every time someone offers us accreditation, they require of us certain kinds of restrictions to which we do not wish to be members.
Okay, fair enough. So, but let's get back to these manuscripts. So, you found, at least in one reference, in a Joseph of Arimathea document, a reference to what? What does it say specifically about a Bigfoot culture?
Well, let me read from the manuscript. It's very short, and I know you don't like to have people read on.
Oh, no, I'm good. Oh, go ahead.
Let me be extremely short with this. It says, "Consider that which was told by the servants of Eban, of Heaven Man, who once wandered the earth. He could not drink of its waters, for he had no mouth. He could not feel the cool winds upon his face. They tell how the she-ape, Shelach, they called the mother of this civilization, led by Heaven Man, she perished in the flames before the valley of Lod. Only one she-ape reached the caves' heights above. And when Heaven Man was reborn of the she-ape in the cavern of woe, could he taste the fruits of the earth and drink of her waters and feel the coolness of her winds? Did he not find life good? It is not all a tale of the courtyard." In other words, they had the same sort of doubting system amongst their people that we have in our society.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So the she-ape, and the way it's written, as though this she-ape were a kind of queen.
That is correct.
Okay, that's very, very interesting.
She was led by Heaven Man.
Who do you think Heaven Man is?
Don't know, but I suspect that it was not an animal in the forest.
Right. So that's the reference maybe to the Nephilim you were speaking about earlier, about a fallen angel of some sort?
Something along those lines. That is my impression as well.
Okay.
Now these are not the only. This is just the reference from this Essene manuscript. There are similar kinds of references found in China. We've destroyed 5,000 of the Buddhist monasteries. The Chinese government did. There were references all through those monasteries, and it is my opinion that many of the libraries that were kept underground were not burnt out, and that someday we will retrieve many of those manuscripts that were in those 5,000 Tibetan monasteries.
Well, I love the thought of that. Now, do you have anything specific that survives from, say, a Chinese document that says something that talks also about a she-ape or an ape-like group of civilized beings?
Not at this point. I am on point for those particular manuscripts. This show caught me a little bit off guard. I am working on that at the present time.
Okay. Now, what other documents, what other references do you see then? Anything in the Bible itself?
Specifically, generally speaking, yes, but specifically now.
What are the general speakings that you refer to that might imply an ape-like or a Bigfoot-like civilization?
Well, it's in my own vernacular. When the Elohim in Genesis 6 talk about let us make man in our own image, it implies that there was some other image there and some other beings there before that period of time. And so they were other kinds of credible entities prior to the coming of Adam and Eve.
Well, for that matter, too, the came up yesterday in an open line call about, with whom did Cain mate, or with whom did he join up once he'd been banished from the Garden of Eden? How were there other people out there for him to fraternize with? And I've heard the argument made that might have been a remnant of a Neanderthal community, that it's a little more allegorical to say that there were rival groups of higher evolved human beings and then these other groups, and that if you were kicked out of the human being group, you had to go, if you'll pardon the term, you had to go slumming with some of the lesser evolved hominids of the time.
Well, I have heard that many, many, many times before, and I'm not certain that is being interpreted correctly.
All right. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that in the third manuscript, there were 3 books that I did for the last classes for last month. One of them was called the Book of Creation. One was the book of Dadam y Mueva. And then there was the book of the Cave of the Treasures. Remember when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden, which was said to have been a worldwide kind of a place. When we think of the Garden of Eden, we think of someone's courtyard. The Garden of Eden was a very large place. Adam and Eve left the west gate of the Garden of Eden when they left the garden because they had partaken of the wrong fruit. Many of their children migrated toward the east gate, which was surely between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. When Christopher Columbus came to America, he had 2 specific purposes in mind, and he wrote those in his diaries. One of the purposes was to find a shortcut to Cathay, which his ancestors had done a great deal of trading with the Far East and had gotten wealthy doing that. The second greatest purpose that he had in his diary was to find the west gate of the Garden of Eden. And where was that? He was headed the wrong direction if he was looking for the traditional homeland of the Garden of Eden, which we think in our religious situation at this moment in history as exclusively being between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Christopher Columbus was headed westbound. It is my opinion that that the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve left, where the Cave of the Treasures was elevated above the rest of the ground, was perhaps likely here in the Americas.
I love this thought that this above ground and underground dichotomy that you talked more about last hour, about that there could be these underground networks of tunnels dug by Bigfoot-like communities, and that might explain how they pop out and disappear pretty easily in the forest. Now, has anybody ever, has any explorer through the United States, anybody like Lewis and Clark or anybody else, has anybody ever talked about seeing cavemen-like people coming in and out of hillsides? Have you ever heard anything about that?
Of course, as I had indicated earlier in the program, this representative from the Mayan group that came to visit us. They had a book with 800 pages written on plates of metal, which contained the creation of the world story. They talked about the other kinds of entities that live below ground and eventually came out infrequently into the world. They also talk about giants, people who are above average in height. I know that being naive when I was young and living near the gold museums in Lima, Peru, which are still open to the public today, you can go see them. There were two giant kings that are 9.5 feet tall. Take your tape measure with you and measure them. I did, and these were big boys, very big boys, and they were covered with gold woven cloaks that were 14 feet long. They had gloves on their hands, with the fingers were just over 10 inches long. Their spears were something that I couldn't lift. I don't know how they threw those things, but they were still and still are in the museums in Lima, Peru. So these are part of the people that lived underground. It's amazing to me, but one of them appeared in one of the major cities in Belize, along with some of the Mayan people who came for supplies, specific kinds of supplies that they were lacking in these underground tunnels. And one of the beings with them was a giant, someone that was extremely tall. And by the time CNN cameras came, he had disappeared back into the forest. So who knows how many different civilizations live in these cavernous regions, and not the least of which were, in fact, the ape people.
I wonder whether one could make an argument that even Goliath himself in the Bible could have been an inheritor of a genetic code from somebody like a Neanderthal, because, I mean, not that they would account for the height, because I don't think Neanderthal were that much taller than Homo sapiens. I think Homo sapiens are taller. But if it were a Bigfoot-like creature, that might account for the gigantism of the biblical character of Goliath.
I have little doubt that that's true. I have always felt that to be the case, that there was such a variety of species on the earth prior to the coming of Adam and Eve, much more so than in our day and age. Hesiod speaks about the fact that we would live in the day of great doubt, great skepticism, and largely because we have the last cataclysm, the cataclysm that left Atlantis under the ocean, wiped out the majority of the people and left us truly alone. Some of the cataclysms in history didn't wipe out as many people. So it's totally possible that the creation of the types of beings that were here in the original humanoid, hominid type things, this would give Jeff Meldrum a conniption fit, because he would not feel the same way we do about this, or at least I do.
Yeah, I'm just kind of exploring it. I've really thought, and I was actually looking at Meldrum's book just the other day. I think his Bigfoot evidence is some of the best that's ever been gathered, and I think in particular, his critical eye brings a level of credibility to the Bigfoot researcher that not everybody else can muster. That having been said, I don't know that I agree that it's only an animal. I just don't know quite how anybody could say it's only an animal when one considers the cleverness of this animal to have eluded any sort of scrutiny, especially at the size. One thing if it's like a little forest mouse or something, but this is a big beast. So, I mean, I'm trying to give fair airing to the idea that somehow there's underground layers, if you will, of these Bigfoot creatures. Now, Okay, so anybody else, I mean, just as long as we were talking about the ancient manuscripts earlier, anywhere else where you think you see evidence of giant apes or ape-like Bigfoot creatures referred to? Have we covered all of those?
No. Some of the major books, systems, libraries are in the Far East. They certainly are in Tibet, in the Himalayan mountains. They're certainly in Africa. They're certainly in the Americas.
Okay. But you don't have those. You don't have any other of all the documents you have, you've read or you've referenced all of the ones that are known documents.
That's correct.
Okay. Because
the Kebra Nagas, the Coburn Bible, for example, the Jesus Sutras.
Tell me about the Colburn Bible. Is there any reference in the Colburn Bible, which we did a whole show on? I still got it over by my desk. This sort of parallel or alternative Bible. Is there anything in there about a Bigfoot civilization?
Absolutely. In fact, I just read to you from the Colburn Bible.
Okay, that was from the Colburn. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure. So that's what that was, and then the because I want to go pull that up, and I want to go look at that during the break, and I'll get to that in just a second. The other, I hear about every so once in a while you'll hear somebody else talking about a civilization that doesn't have a soul, and that comes up in religious documents periodically. That there would be, this group had the divine spark, but this group over here doesn't. And I wonder whether that could be part of that tradition, that somehow the people that didn't have that or thought not to reflect from God, as you alluded to earlier, were the people that were hominids, and the people that did appear to be from the gods had less hair, had a different look, had a different feel to them. And those are the people that were thought to have a soul, and the other ones didn't.
Well, I think, you and I might disagree on this. I don't think that the translation is correct when it says they didn't have a soul. I think the definitive point of differentiation here is the difference between the actual children of the Elohim and those who are not the children of the Elohim. In other words, who are children of God and who are not. I think dogs have souls. I think worms have souls. People like to think that we're the only creatures, we're the highest level on the food chain, and therefore we're the only ones that have souls. And a soul is merely, if you were to look at the denotative meaning of soul, it's the merger of the physical and the spiritual. That's what a soul is. Okay. And I really don't think that applies in this particular case. It applies really to the divinity in terms of their relationship with the creators of the universe. Yeah. There are many life forms on this planet which are derived from DNA, for example, which are not direct children of the fourth level society or God. Okay. The people who have the power to create the universe.
Well, I'll be totally honest with you, Glenn. I'll say I've been looking at the phones all night, and people have been ringing these phones like crazy. So I think what we'll do is we'll just go to the phones a little bit earlier, and we'll give people a chance to jump in because I know they want to. So we'll give the numbers coming up in just a minute, and I don't know how many we'll get between now and the top of the hour. We'll definitely go wall-to-wall with it next hour. But for the remainder of this hour, I think we can start squeezing in a couple of phone calls from people who have been hearing Glenn Kimball of Kimball College, and you can link up to him through coasttocoastam.com. There's a new course on these ancient documents that mention Bigfoot or great ape-like creatures, and we'll get to your questions and comments. What is it that you wonder about, or what other documents might you know about that includes some sort of reference like that, or something that we could reconsider if thought of through a different lens? We'll find out next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. Well, I'm going to run an email by Glenn Kimball in just a second. Got it from a friend who's listening to the show right now. Spent a little time in seminary herself, and she makes an interesting point about the creation story and Neanderthal man and woman, and we'll get to that in just a moment. And your questions and comments, too. Going to the phones a little bit early with Glenn Kimball, because I know the phones have been buzzing all night long for people to get in on this conversation. Bigfoot in the Bible, for that matter, other ancient documents, where could there be references to giant ape-like creatures in other civilizations that either exist, documents we've seen and just never looked at through the right lens, or other documents that we suspect exist that would make the point if we could just get our hands on them? We'll tell you more about that coming up next with Glenn Kimball and you on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So we were just talking about ancient civilizations. Perhaps there is an underground civilization of Bigfoot-like creatures that have been able to avoid detection, both in our Pacific Northwest in the United States and other underground caverns around the world where they could have been collecting their bones and funereal practices that keep them from being discovered. Now, I want to go back to something we were talking about, the Neanderthal, and whether or not, and some people have argued, that Neanderthal man and woman existed simultaneously with Homo sapiens for about 15,000 years. And fairly recently on the historical timeline. And I had made the comment about whether or not, when Cain was kicked out of the garden in the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, whether or not Cain sought refuge with Neanderthal man, those were the only other available mates or companions, and that's why it was spoken of shamefully that one went to go live with them. Now, Glenn, I know you feel differently about it, but I just want to share what Gigi said. She said, as a woman I knew in seminary, she said, why wouldn't we think about it the other way around? Maybe paradise is when we were Neanderthal. Maybe that was paradise. Life was simpler. Everything made sense. Maybe that tree of knowledge represents when we got too smart and we could no longer coexist peacefully with the other Neanderthal. And so we got kicked out of the garden, forced to find an existence on our own.
Well, in one aspect, I would agree that this heaven man or Shelach or the ape people lived during a time period when society was more advanced than our own, and they learned from that. For Neanderthal to have been around for 1 million years, it could not have, and to be intelligent like it obviously is. If you were to talk to our Native American Indian brothers, they would tell you that this is a very smart creature. This is not just a smart dog that can roll over and yelp for food. This is a calculating creature with facial expressions that are human, with movements that are human, with thinking processes which would rival our own. But if that's the case, then perhaps they accelerated, and it's my conservative opinion that they know more in some areas specifically than we do today.
You mean Neanderthals? You mean the Bigfoot creatures? I mean the Bigfoot creature.
Okay. You could look straight at them in the eyeballs and not even know you're looking at them. That's my opinion.
Wait, whoa. You're saying that Bigfoot creatures are indistinguishable from human beings?
No, they are distinguishable. I'm saying that in the wilds of Mother Nature, that they would have the ability to hide in a fashion that is sophisticated.
All right, so you said look them in the eyeballs and not know they were there. You meant because they were camouflaged, not because they look just like us.
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, well, lots of people want to get through for Glenn Kimball. Let's go ahead and grab a couple of these right away. Alan, first-time caller line, New York City, Coast to Coast AM for Glenn Kimball. Go ahead, Alan.
Hey, how are you?
Great. So Bigfoot in the Bible, or at least in the biblical era. Where are you with that?
I think it's actually really fascinating. With the Neanderthals, and I was kind of thinking that one idea was that maybe the Neanderthals went underground, as you said, and perhaps evolved into the Bigfoot. But my question really was also, like other early hominids, why are there no physical relics or fossils of the Bigfoot ape people like the Neanderthals, other mammals? Did they always just know how to hide the remains? More traces?
Well, don't speak to Jeff, because he would take you apart bone by bone. He said that there are relics. There's tangible proof that he in his office has tangible proof. I'd love to roam through his office one day. He would suggest to us that we have found it and we've ignored it.
To Alan's point, though, maybe if, again, it was just a theory, it's just a conversation, but let's say that there were these, prehistoric men that were not Homo sapiens. They go underground. Over time, they evolve into what we call today Bigfoot. And that they are, in fact, a human-like species, not an animal-like species, as Jeff Meldrum would assert. Is that roughly a possibility for you, Glenn?
Yes.
Okay. If that's true, then what happened to the Bigfoot technology? And I say that in the sense that Neanderthal, we know, were Stone Age tool users. They were spear throwers. They were flint arrowhead makers or spearhead makers. They were tool makers. I would think that if nothing else, then in any of all of the sightings of Bigfoot, you never hear anything about Bigfoot carrying a weapon.
That's only because we talk about them in a limited nature. We don't list all the skills that they may have had. I think about the classes we're doing for next month, and we talk about the son of King Zedekiah that is not mentioned in the Bible. We talk about Tetefi, who's not mentioned in the Bible. Just because we didn't mention it doesn't mean they couldn't do it. Just because it's not written, or because somebody in their arrogance in the copying process left it out. We cannot. There are no perfect manuscripts.
I'll grant you on manuscript, but I just mean even like any sightings. I went through the Meldrum book pretty carefully, and I reread it recently, and I don't ever remember any conversation about a Bigfoot walking with, say, an antler claw, or a Bigfoot being spotted carrying a spear. And I wonder whether, if they had the technology, how a species could lose that kind of low-level technology over time.
Maybe they don't need spears now. Maybe they've evolved past spears. Maybe their weapons of choice are beyond the weapons of a primitive society.
Okay. Is it Lindell in Boynton Beach, Florida?
Yes, sir. Have either of y'all, well, let me just say this. There were some documents found in Baghdad, and I guess they were, 1,000 or 1,500 years old, about this ambassador that took a trip. I think it was to wherever the Vikings were from back then, and they encountered a group of these people and had a couple battles with them, and it's been well documented, and there's a guy who wrote a book about it. His name was Michael Crichton. You ever heard of him?
No.
Never heard of Michael Crichton, the Cretan?
Michael Crichton, you mean the author? Michael Crichton, as in like Jurassic Park Michael Crichton.
Yeah. Yeah, he wrote a book about it years ago called Eaters of the Dead. You ever heard of that?
Oh,
no.
Yeah. Now that you're saying, pardon me, I'm having a difficulty with your lovely accent.
I'm sorry. It's Eaters of the Dead, and they made a movie about it called The 13th Warrior.
Right. I just wikied it while we were talking, and it says right here, and thank you, Lindell, Eaters of the Dead, the manuscript of Ibn Fadian relating to his experiences with the Northmen in AD 922, but it was a novel by Michael Crichton.
That's correct.
So I'm looking here, and it says here sources and inspiration. Afterward in the novel, Crichton gives a few comments on its origin. A good friend of Crichton's was giving a lecture on the, quote, the bores of literature. Including this lecture was an argument on Beowulf, and Crichton stated his views that the story was not a bore, but I don't know. It doesn't say anything at all about it actually being a real document. But if it's true, it doesn't list it here, and we can go on for that. But it does say it's a good novel, and it doesn't surprise me because Michael Crichton's always fun to read. East of the Rockies, Steve is in Evansville, Indiana, for Glenn Kimball on Coast to Coast AM. Steve?
Yes. Hi, Ian.
Hi.
It's a pleasure to talk to you.
And to you.
And you bring a great flavor to the show. I really enjoy listening.
Try to. Glad you called. So where are you on this idea that Neanderthal men and women could have gone underground and reemerged as Bigfoot?
I've gave it much thought. I was wanting to ask Mr. Kimball, and it's a pleasure to talk to you too.
Yes.
That, I know, like, from Zechariah Sitchin, when Giants was translated from the Old Text, that, those were the Nephilim. And that when Moses came out of Egypt and they sent spies into Canaan, that, they said they were giants. Could these be were these the fallen angels, or could they be meaning the Bigfoot people, I guess?
Well, they're certainly not the Bigfoot people. They were, you'd have to talk to people who are specialists in giants. But I don't think we're talking about the ape people when we discuss that.
Okay. Who do you think we're talking about then?
We're probably talking about a descendant of the giant Aryan people who survived the last cataclysm of Atlantis and Lemuria.
West of the Rockies, Larry is in San Francisco for Glenn Kimball of Kimball College on Coast to Coast AM. Larry?
Good morning. A few points real quick. When you're correlating Bigfoot with the ancient hominids, wouldn't a closer correlation be not Neanderthal, but maybe Australopithecines, because they were really large. They had the shape of head that's described with the Bigfoot, and Neanderthals looked nothing like that. In fact, they look quite a bit like modern human beings. I've been racking my brain trying to think of texts that talk about ape men, and the only thing I've been able to come up with is the Devo song, Jocko Homo. Are you familiar with that?
I am.
It goes, God made man, but he used the monkey to do it. Ape's in the plan, and I can prove it. Talk like an ape, walk like an ape, do what monkeys do. God made man, but the monkey supplied the glue.
Well, and that obviously is a longer form kind of evolution that we're talking about in a way. And let's just back up from Larry's question for a second. In a way, we are talking about crossbreeding and other things, which, if it did happen, it doesn't have to have been so linearly as just, the Neanderthal went underground and came out as Bigfoot. I kind of summed up Glenn's position that way just for the facility of this conversation. You were talking about it earlier, and you weren't making it sound as it were that simplistic. So I'm sorry if I've misspoken your position.
No, I think you speak my position, but I would add one thing, that the DNA molecule is an extremely complex molecule. For God to have had, for heaven's sake, plants use a DNA molecule. And so the DNA molecule is the basic unit for all life on the planet. What the outcome is, or how it was generated, or how it evolved, or how it branched off, with the exception of the sons of God, could have been varied in sundry, and frankly, I don't know.
I wonder, is there any record, and I don't know enough about prehistoric hominid types, but are there any other burial practices that we know of from the Neanderthal? I mean, did they have a particular way of burying their dead that we know about now that might inform us, if your theory is true, on how the Bigfoot are disposing of their bones?
Well, we know from that document that I gave you on with regard to the Cave of the Treasures, one of the things that they did most anciently was to embalm people and put them back in the cave. Adam was embalmed by his son and was placed back into a cave and was reverenced for many generations until they moved him from the Cave of the Treasures, which was a holy place, by the way. And the implication that Adam lived in the Cave of the Treasures was the fact that the cave had a treasure before Adam and Eve came to that cave, and it had treasures in it deposited by a former civilization, or was made habitable, or whatever made it special came from a former civilization. But the earliest burial practice was embalming, and then that was permanently interred in some location, in some cases, which was protected by the Nephilim or by the cherubim and the flaming sword, and in some cases it was not. That doesn't mean that one person was better than another. In the case of Adam, it probably did, but that's why they built the pyramids, was to house the embalmed remains of the kings of Egypt.
Let's get to Wayne. He's in Medford, Oregon, on Coast to Coast AM for Glenn Kimball. Wayne?
Yes, gentlemen. I just wanted to bring up the point that not all history is written. There's a lot of oral history regarding Bigfoot and the Yeti, and all across the Pacific Northwest and into Canada and all through Canada. Saskatchewan is a native name, and it's derived from Saskatch, which is Sasquatch, and that's also a name for Bigfoot.
Sure. So, yeah, great. Oral traditions. What does it say? And what have you heard? Anything?
Oh, plenty. But it's all been documented by people previous to Mr. Kimball. And I can't go through all of it right now, but
any of them make reference to Bigfoot living underground?
In caves or in nests, yes, but not necessarily underground.
In a kind of network that Glenn is talking about. How about burial practices? Anything in the oral tradition about how Bigfoot are disposing of their bones?
The only thing I know of is that the natives used to they'd bury bones and let them or leave them out in trees to bleach in the sun, and then they'd bury them. Okay,
but you haven't heard anything about that. Well, see, yeah, I'm all about oral traditions are great, but I want to know what they are. So if you know of somebody that knows them, have them give us a call. We'll pick it up here. Going into our last hour with Glenn Kimball of Kimball College. And if you want to sign up for this class on Bigfoot, you can. Just go ahead and click on to coasttocoastam.com, and you can go to Glenn's link from there. And we got a full boat of calls. Everybody wants to talk about this. The possibility that the ancient Bigfoot civilizations that existed before went literally underground. And that's where they are, and that's where, if we knew where to look, we would find those bones from generations of Bigfoot that have been living right alongside of us. Coming up on Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett.